But the Velcor weren't just targeting military installations. Sarah watched in horror as the feeds showed strikes on the lunar colonies, on Mars Base Alpha, on the mining stations in the asteroid belt. These were civilian facilities, homes to families and children, research centers and farms. The Velcor were attacking them all with ruthless efficiency. On Earth itself, electromagnetic pulses struck major cities, disabling power grids and communication networks. The planet descended into darkness and confusion. Military bases found their systems frozen, their weapons offline, their vehicles dead. The Velcor had studied humanity thoroughly during those 6 weeks of negotiations. They knew every weakness, every vulnerability. They had planned this attack with precision, and now they were executing it perfectly. Sarah ran through the corridors of the space station, trying to reach the emergency pods. Other humans were doing the same, scientists and diplomats fleeing in panic. She passed a viewport and saw one of the Velcor ships hovering close to the station, its weapons ports glowing. She understood then that they had never intended to let anyone escape, to let anyone tell the story of this betrayal. The station shook again, harder this time. Sarah was thrown against the wall, her shoulder impacting with brutal force. Emergency lights flickered and died. In the darkness, she heard screaming. She crawled forward, feeling her way along the corridor, her breath loud in her helmet. She had to get to a pod. She had to survive. Someone had to survive to tell Earth what had happened. Survivors Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the destroyer Resolute, one of Earth's newer military vessels stationed near Jupiter. She had been conducting routine patrol exercises when her sensor officer detected the energy signatures of the Velcor attack. Elena immediately ordered her ship to battle stations, but she knew they were too far away to help defend Earth. By the time the Resolute could reach home, the battle would be over. She watched the tactical display as red icons blinked out one by one, each one representing a destroyed human vessel or station. The lunar colonies went dark. Mars Base Alpha stopped transmitting. The orbital platforms that had taken decades to build were reduced to debris in minutes. Elena felt rage building in her chest, a cold fury that pushed aside the fear and despair. Her communication officer managed to establish a connection with Earth Defense Command, but the signal was weak and filled with static. Through the interference, she heard Marcus Webb's voice, calm despite the chaos around him. He was coordinating what remained of Earth's military from his underground facility, one of the few command centers that had survived the initial assault. Marcus gave her coordinates for a rendezvous point in the outer solar system. He told her that 6 other ships had survived the attack, scattered across the system but intact. He ordered her to gather them, to stay hidden and to wait for further instructions. Earth needed time to recover, to understand what had happened, to plan a response. The Resolute and the other survivors were humanity's last military assets, and they couldn't be wasted in futile gestures. Elena acknowledged the orders. Though every instinct screamed at her to charge toward Earth and make the Velcor pay for what they had done, she set course for the rendezvous coordinates, pushing her engines as hard as they would go. Around her, the bridge crew worked in grim silence, each one processing the reality that their families and friends on Earth were under attack, and there was nothing they could do to help. The message A's, the Resolute fled deeper into the outer system. The Velcor Council broadcast a message to all surviving human facilities. Executor. Thrain's face appeared on every screen that still functioned, his golden eyes devoid of the warmth they had shown during the negotiations. He spoke in perfect English, his voice carrying across the void of space to reach every human who could still listen. The message was simple and brutal. Humanity had been evaluated and found wanting. The Council had seen species like humans before, aggressive and expansionist, unwilling to accept their proper place in the galactic order. Such species were always dealt with in the same way, crushed before they could become a threat to the established peace. Earth's military was to dismantle immediately. All spacecraft were to be surrendered. Humanity was confined to Earth itself, forbidden from venturing beyond their own atmosphere. Any violation of these terms would result in the complete extinction of the human species. Thrain explained that this was not cruelty, but necessity. The Council had maintained peace for 8,000 years by eliminating potential threats before they could mature. Humanity's rapid technological progress, their aggressive nature, their refusal to submit completely to Council authority, all of these made them too dangerous to allow to continue unchecked. This attack was not the beginning of a war. It was the end of a war humanity had lost before they even knew they were fighting. The message ended with casualty figures. 4 million dead in the initial strikes, another 2 million expected to die in the aftermath as Earth's infrastructure collapsed. The lunar colonies had been completely destroyed. Every man, woman, and child killed in the bombardment. Mars Base Alpha was gone. The asteroid mining stations were rubble. In less than 3 hours, the Velcor had reduced humanity's presence in space to almost nothing. Sarah Chen managed to reach an escape pod and launched just before the space station broke apart. She floated in the darkness, watching debris scatter across the void, bodies of her colleagues drifting among the wreckage. Her pod systems were minimal, designed only to keep her alive until rescue could arrive. But there would be no rescue, not for a long time. She activated the emergency beacon, knowing it was futile, and waited in the cold and dark. On Earth, Marcus Webb stood in his command center, surrounded by screens showing the devastation. Cities were dark, millions without power or water. Hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties. The governments were in chaos, unable to communicate or coordinate. The Velcor ships remained in orbit, weapons trained on the planet below, ready to strike again if humanity showed any sign of resistance. But Marcus wasn't thinking about surrender. He was thinking about the 6 ships that had survived, about the hidden weapons caches he had prepared against exactly this scenario, about the experimental technologies that Earth had been developing in secret facilities unknown to the Velcor. He was thinking about the fact that the Velcor had made a critical mistake. They had attacked humanity expecting quick submission. They had studied human history and seen that humans often surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. What they hadn't understood was that humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Marcus opened a secure channel to Captain Vasquez and the other surviving commanders. He spoke 4 words that would begin humanity's response to the Velcor betrayal. Initiate protocol Scorched Earth. The war had just begun, and the Velcor Council had no idea what they had unleashed. The human response and counterattack regrouping. In the shadows, Captain Elena Vasquez guided the Resolute through the ice fields of the Kuiper Belt, her ship running on minimal power to avoid detection. Over the past 72 hours, 6 other vessels had arrived at the rendezvous coordinates, each one carrying survivors and stories of narrow escapes. There was the cruiser Defiance, commanded by Captain Robert Chen, who had been conducting deep space research when the attack began. The frigate Phoenix had been stationed near Saturn, far enough from Earth to evade the initial assault. 4 smaller corvettes completed the group, fast attack ships with limited firepower but excellent maneuverability. Elena floated in the zero-gravity observation deck, watching the other ships drift in formation. 7 vessels against an empire that spanned 12 star systems. 7 ships to avenge 4 million dead and restore humanity's freedom. The odds were impossible, but Elena had learned something important in her 20 years of military service. Impossible odds just meant you had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than your enemy. Her communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission from Earth. Marcus Webb's face appeared on the screen, and Elena felt a shock at his appearance. The commander looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his voice remained steady and focused. The deception and the strike first contact. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, detected by the Deep Space Array stationed beyond Pluto. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation room of the International Space Monitoring Center in Geneva, her coffee growing cold in her hand as she watched the translated symbols scroll across the screen. After 2 centuries of searching, listening, and hoping, humanity had finally received an answer from the stars. The message was elegant in its simplicity, transmitted in mathematical sequences that any spacefaring civilization would understand. It spoke of peace, knowledge, and a community of intelligent species spanning thousands of light years. The Velcor Council, as they called themselves, extended an invitation to humanity to join the galactic civilization. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she read the words again and again. She had dedicated her entire life to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, enduring ridicule from colleagues who called it a waste of resources. Now, at 43 years old, she was witnessing the most important moment in human history. Around her, scientists and officials erupted in celebration, embracing each other and cheering. The director of the facility immediately contacted the United Nations, the various space agencies, and the leaders of Earth's major powers. Within hours, every screen on Earth displayed the alien message, and humanity collectively held its breath. Divided Opinions Commander Marcus Webb read the decoded message from his office in the Earth Defense Intelligence Headquarters, buried 300 meters beneath the Rocky Mountains. Unlike the celebrating masses, Marcus felt his stomach tighten with unease. He had spent 25 years in military intelligence, learning to recognize patterns, to see what others missed, to question everything that seemed too good to be true. And this message seemed far too good to be true. Marcus pulled up the detailed analysis his team had prepared. The Velcor Council claimed to represent 47 different species across 12 star systems. They had existed for over 8,000 years, maintaining peace and prosperity through cooperation and shared technology. They offered to share advances in medicine that could extend human life by decades, energy systems that would end Earth's environmental crisis, and propulsion technology that would make the stars truly accessible. All they asked in return was friendship, cultural exchange, and Earth's agreement to follow certain guidelines for peaceful coexistence. He zoomed in on those guidelines, reading them carefully. Restrictions on military expansion beyond certain boundaries, limitations on artificial intelligence development, mandatory sharing of all scientific discoveries with the Council, requirements to submit to Council arbitration in any disputes with other species. Marcus highlighted each clause, making notes in the margins. These weren't the terms of an alliance between equals. These were the conditions a superior power imposed on a subordinate one. He drafted a report outlining his concerns and sent it up the chain of command. Within an hour, it came back with a notation from the Secretary General himself, thanking Marcus for his diligence, but explaining that the potential benefits far outweighed the risks. Humanity could not afford to let fear and paranoia cost them this opportunity. Marcus saved the report in his personal files and continued monitoring the situation, trusting his instincts even when no one else did. The arrival 3 months later, the Velcor ships arrived in Earth orbit. There were 5 of them, each one a masterpiece of engineering that made humanity's best spacecraft look like primitive toys. They were elegant vessels, their hulls composed of a metallic substance that shifted colors in the sunlight, flowing through shades of silver, gold, and deep blue. The ships positioned themselves in a formation above Earth, visible to anyone who looked up at the night sky. The Velcor sent a delegation to meet with Earth's leaders at a specially constructed facility on the neutral ground of the International Space Station, which had been expanded specifically for this purpose. Sarah Chen was selected as one of the scientific representatives, an honor that made her dizzy with excitement and responsibility. She traveled up to the station aboard a shuttle, watching Earth shrink below her and the alien ships grow larger ahead. The Velcor representatives were not what she had expected. There were 5 of them, each from a different species within the Council. The lead diplomat was named Executor Thrain, a being that stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that resembled polished obsidian. His eyes were large and golden, possessing an intelligence that seemed to look right through Sarah when they met. Beside him stood a creature that floated rather than walked, its body composed of what appeared to be living crystal. Another resembled an enormous insect, but moved with grace and purpose. The diversity was staggering, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. The negotiations lasted 6 weeks. Sarah worked alongside the Velcor scientists, learning about their technology and sharing information about human biology and culture. They were patient teachers, answering her questions with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. They showed her holographic displays of their home worlds, cities that stretched across continents, medical facilities where diseases humanity still struggled with had been eliminated millennia ago. She felt like a child being shown wonders beyond imagination. But there were moments that troubled her, small things that she tried to dismiss. The way Executor Thrain's expression shifted when humans discussed their plans for expansion into the solar system. The brief pause before answering questions about Council military capabilities. The carefully worded responses when asked what happened to species that declined to join the Council. Sarah told herself she was being paranoid, influenced perhaps by too many science fiction stories about hostile aliens. The treaty. The final treaty was presented to Earth's United Assembly in a grand ceremony, broadcast to every corner of the planet. President Elena Ortega of the United Earth government stood at the podium, the document displayed on screens behind her in both human and Velcor languages. The treaty promised protection, technology, and guidance. It guaranteed human rights and cultural preservation. In exchange, Earth would become a provisional member of the Velcor Council, subject to certain restrictions until humanity proved itself ready for full membership. Marcus Webb watched the ceremony from his office, his fingers drumming on his desk. He had submitted 3 more reports, each one ignored or dismissed. His superiors had made it clear that his pessimism was not helpful in this historic moment. But Marcus had done more than write reports. He had quietly activated a network of deep space sensors, unauthorized and hidden from official records. He had positioned automated weapons platforms in obscure orbits, disguised as debris or defunct satellites, and he had established protocols with a handful of military commanders who shared his concerns, officers who would act on his signal without waiting for official authorization. The signing ceremony concluded with President Ortega and Executor Thrain pressing their hands to the digital document, sealing humanity's fate. The celebration that followed was the largest in human history. Every major city erupted in festivals. Schools declared holidays. Religious leaders of all faiths spoke of a new age of enlightenment and cooperation. Sarah Chen attended the reception on the space station, toasting with Velcor diplomats who seemed genuinely pleased by humanity's enthusiasm. The betrayal. The attack came 72 hours later. During the night cycle on the space station, Sarah was asleep in her quarters when the alarms began screaming. She tumbled from her bed, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The station shuddered, and she heard the sound of explosions echoing through the corridors. She pulled on her emergency suit with shaking hands and activated her communication panel. The screen showed chaos. The Velcor ships that had been positioned peacefully in orbit had opened fire without warning. Their weapons were beyond anything humanity possessed, beams of concentrated energy that cut through Earth's defensive satellites like they were made of paper. The orbital defense platforms that Marcus had spent decades building and positioning were being systematically destroyed. Each one that fired back was eliminated within seconds. Marcus briefed the surviving commanders on the situation planetside. The electromagnetic pulses had disabled most of Earth's infrastructure, but not all of it. Hardened military facilities, underground research centers, and isolated communities with their own power sources had survived. More importantly, the secret projects that Marcus had been funding through black budget programs were intact. Earth had been working on technologies that the Velcor Council knew nothing about. Developments that humanity had kept hidden even during the seemingly friendly negotiations. The most important of these was the quantum displacement drive, a propulsion system based on principles that seemed to violate everything the Velcor understood about physics. Where Council ships used conventional faster-than-light travel through established jump points, the quantum drive allowed instantaneous movement to any point in space without following predictable routes. The technology was experimental, unstable, and dangerous. Only 3 prototypes existed, hidden in facilities scattered across the solar system. But if they worked, they would give humanity an advantage the Velcor could never anticipate. Marcus had another asset to reveal. Dr. Sarah Chen had been rescued from her escape pod by a salvage vessel that had been hiding in the debris field around the destroyed space station. She was alive, traumatized but functional, and now working in an underground facility in New Zealand. Sarah had been studying Velcor technology during the negotiations, and she had made copies of their computer systems, their communication protocols, their security codes. The Velcor had been so confident in their superiority that they had never considered a human scientist might be capable of understanding and replicating their technology. Elena listened to Marcus outline his plan, and with each word she felt hope beginning to replace despair. This wasn't going to be a conventional war. Humanity didn't have the numbers or the firepower for that. Instead, this would be a war of deception, surprise, and psychological warfare. The Velcor had studied humanity's military history, but they had focused on the wrong lessons. They had seen World War II and the Cold War, conflicts between roughly equal powers fighting with similar technologies. They hadn't studied asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, or the kind of desperate innovation that humans achieved when survival was on the line. The virus in her laboratory deep beneath the mountains of New Zealand's South Island. Dr. Sarah Chen worked without sleep, sustained by stimulants and fury. The betrayal had transformed her. The woman who had wept with joy at first contact now spent every waking moment finding ways to hurt the species she had once admired. She had been a fool to trust them, to believe their promises. Now she would make them pay for her naivety with interest. The Velcor computer systems were sophisticated, far more advanced than anything Earth had developed. But sophistication came with complexity, and complexity created vulnerabilities. Sarah had discovered that the Velcor relied heavily on artificial intelligence to manage their ships and facilities. These AI systems were networked, sharing information constantly to maintain efficiency across their empire. It was a brilliant design that had served them well for thousands of years. It was also a single point of failure waiting to be exploited. Sarah created a virus unlike anything that had existed before. It wasn't designed to destroy Velcor systems immediately. That would be detected and countered too quickly. Instead, her virus was subtle, almost invisible. It would infiltrate their networks and simply watch, learning their patterns, their protocols, their security measures. It would spread slowly through their connected systems, hiding in the background processes that the Velcor AI used for routine operations. And when Sarah gave the activation signal, the virus would simultaneously corrupt targeting systems, scramble communication frequencies, and introduce microsecond delays into fire control computers. The beauty of the design was that the Velcor would never see it coming. Their own arrogance would blind them. They had defeated every species they had ever encountered. They had no reason to believe that primitive humanity could create something that could threaten their systems. Sarah worked with a team of Earth's best programmers and hackers, people who had been creating malware and breaking security systems their entire lives. The Velcor had rules and procedures refined over millennia. Humans had creativity born from chaos. Testing the virus was impossible without alerting the Velcor, so Sarah had to rely on simulations and the data she had collected during the negotiations. She ran the code through millions of scenarios, refining it, streamlining it, making it as close to perfect as possible. After 6 days of continuous work, she declared it ready. Now they needed a way to introduce it into the Velcor network. The capture commander, Marcus Webb, selected a target carefully. The Velcor had established patrol routes around Earth and the inner solar system, ships moving in predictable patterns to enforce the quarantine. One of these patrols consisted of a single medium-sized vessel, a cruiser that traveled between Earth and Mars every 48 hours. It was small enough to be vulnerable, but large enough to have full network access to the Council's systems. It was perfect. Captain Robert Chen of the cruiser Defiance volunteered for the mission. His ship was the most heavily armed of the survivors, and his crew had trained extensively in boarding operations. The plan was simple in concept but extremely difficult in execution. They would ambush the Velcor patrol ship, disable it without destroying it, board it, and capture it intact. The entire operation had to happen quickly, before the Velcor could send reinforcements or trigger their ship's self-destruct systems. The Defiance positioned itself in the shadow of Deimos, one of Mars' moons, and waited. Robert had his entire crew on battle stations, running silent with all non-essential systems offline. They had one chance at this. If they failed, the Velcor would increase security and the opportunity would be lost forever. The Velcor patrol ship approached on schedule, arrogant in its routine. The aliens had no reason to expect an attack. As far as they knew, all human military vessels had been destroyed or had fled to the outer system. The inner solar system was secure, and this patrol was merely a formality. The Defiant struck with everything it had. Railgun rounds, fired at relativistic speeds, tore through the Velcor ship's shields before they could fully activate. Electromagnetic pulse missiles followed, frying the alien vessel's external sensors and communication arrays. The Velcor ship tried to return fire, but its weapon systems were disoriented, its targeting computers confused by the unexpected attack from an impossible angle. Robert's crew executed the boarding operation with precision born from hundreds of hours of training. Marines in combat suits attached to the Velcor hull and cut their way inside, moving through the alien corridors with weapons raised. The Velcor crew fought back, but they were scientists and technicians, not warriors. They had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten what real combat felt like. The human Marines were not peaceful. They had lost families, friends, and homes to the Velcor attack. Every one of them had personal reasons for rage, and they channeled that rage into brutal efficiency. Within 20 minutes, the Velcor ship was secured, its crew either dead or restrained. Robert immediately contacted Marcus with the news. They had their prize. Infiltration Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at the captured Velcor ship aboard a fast shuttle, bringing her virus and a team of technicians. The alien vessel was like nothing she had ever seen inside. Organic curves instead of hard angles, controls that responded to touch and thought, technology that seemed like magic. But Sarah wasn't here to admire. She was here to inject poison into the heart of the Velcor network. Finding the communication system took hours. The Velcor designed their ships differently than humans, with redundant systems layered throughout the vessel. Sarah's team worked methodically, mapping the alien technology, identifying the network nodes. Finally, they located the primary communication array, still functional despite the damage from the attack. Sarah connected her custom interface to the Velcor system, her hands steady despite the importance of the moment. If this didn't work, if the virus was detected, the entire plan would collapse. She initiated the upload sequence, watching lines of code flow into the alien computer. The virus infiltrated smoothly, embedding itself in the background processes exactly as designed. The Velcor AI didn't even register the intrusion, too focused on damage control and attempting to restore ship functions. Within minutes, Sarah's virus began spreading. The captured ship automatically connected to the Velcor network, transmitting routine status updates and requesting assistance. Those transmissions carried the virus into the Council's broader systems, spreading it from ship to ship, station to station. Sarah watched the infiltration map on her screen, seeing the virus propagate through the Velcor empire like a plague. It was beautiful and terrifying. She left a monitoring program running on the captured ship, then returned to Earth with her team. Now came the hard part, waiting. The virus needed time to spread thoroughly through the Velcor systems before activation. If they triggered it too soon, some ships would be unaffected and could mount an effective defense. They needed maximum coverage for maximum effect. The Resistance. While Sarah worked on her technological warfare, Elena Vasquez prepared for the physical campaign. The quantum displacement drives had been successfully installed on 3 ships: the Resolute, a heavily modified corvette named Ghost, and a small stealth vessel called Shadow. These ships would form the core of humanity's offensive strike force, appearing in impossible locations to hit targets the Velcor thought were safe. Elena spent days studying Velcor tactics and deployments. Marcus provided intelligence from Earth-based observations and intercepted communications. The Velcor were methodical, efficient, and predictable. They had perfected their approach over thousands of years, refining it against dozens of conquered species. They followed established protocols, moved in standard formations, and relied on their technological superiority to overcome any resistance. That predictability would be their downfall. Elena planned a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to confuse and demoralize the Velcor forces. The quantum drives would allow her ships to strike, then vanish before the enemy could respond. She would target supply lines, isolated patrols, communication relays. Nothing dramatic, just constant harassment that would force the Velcor to spread their forces thin and question their assumptions about human capabilities. The first attack came 18 days after the initial Velcor assault. The Resolute appeared without warning in orbit around Ganymede, where the Velcor had established a forward operating base. Elena's weapons officer launched a full spread of missiles at the alien facility, then the quantum drive activated, and the Resolute vanished. The entire engagement lasted 37 seconds. The Velcor base was crippled, its docking facilities destroyed, its garrison left confused and disorganized. 6 hours later, the Ghost struck a supply convoy traveling between Mars and Earth. The small corvette appeared in the middle of the formation, fired its railguns at point-blank range into the lead transport ship, and disappeared again. The Velcor escort vessels opened fire on empty space, hitting nothing but their own ships in the confusion. Elena coordinated these attacks from the Resolute, appearing across the solar system in a pattern designed to seem random, but carefully calculated to maximize psychological impact. The Velcor had thought the war was over. Now they were learning that humanity was far from defeated. Each attack was small, inflicting minimal damage in the grand scheme of things. But the cumulative effect was significant. The Velcor were being forced to divert resources to defense, to question their security, to fear the sudden appearance of human ships in locations that should have been impossible to reach. The Council Responds Executor Thrain convened an emergency meeting of the Velcor Council in their flagship, the Eternal Ascendant, which orbited Earth like a sword hanging over humanity's throat. The 7-member species gathered in holographic form, each leader appearing from their respective homeworlds. Thrain stood at the center of the council chamber, his forearms held in a gesture of controlled frustration. The human resistance was becoming problematic. The attacks themselves were minor, easily repaired, replaceable losses, but the fact that they were happening at all contradicted everything the Velcor understood about this phase of conquest. Defeated species surrendered. They recognized superior force and submitted. They didn't continue fighting with experimental technology and guerrilla tactics. Thrain had reviewed humanity's military history extensively before recommending the attack. Humans were aggressive but rational. When faced with extinction, they negotiated. When outmatched, they surrendered. The Velcor had seen this pattern in every human conflict. Why were they behaving differently now? The council debated strategy. Some members advocated for a demonstration of force, suggesting they destroy one of Earth's major cities to remind humanity of the consequences of resistance. Others recommended increasing patrols and tightening the blockade. A few suggested negotiating, offering humanity a chance to surrender with dignity rather than face complete annihilation. Thrain rejected all these suggestions. Destroying cities would only strengthen human resolve, turning their desperation into fanaticism. Increased patrols would stretch Velcor resources thin across the solar system, and negotiation would show weakness, suggesting that humanity's resistance was actually working. Instead, Thrain proposed a different approach. They would find and destroy the human command structure, cut off the head of the resistance. Without leadership, the scattered human forces would collapse. He assigned his best intelligence officers to locate Earth's military command centers. The Velcor had sensors that could detect power signatures, communication emissions, and industrial activity. It was only a matter of time before they found Marcus Webb's hidden facilities and eliminated them. Then this irritating resistance would end, and humanity would finally accept their fate. What Thrain didn't know was that while he was planning humanity's defeat, Sarah Chen was preparing to activate her virus. The countdown had begun. The turning point. 28 days after the Velcor attack, Marcus Webb gave the activation order. Sarah Chen sat at her console in New Zealand, her finger hovering over the trigger command. Around her, technicians monitored the virus's spread through the Velcor network. Coverage was at 93%, better than they had hoped for. Almost every Velcor vessel and facility in the solar system was infected. Some ships in the outer reaches of Council space remained clean, but they were too far away to respond quickly to the chaos that was about to unfold. Sarah pressed the button and watched her creation come to life. Across the solar system, in hundreds of Velcor ships and stations, the virus activated simultaneously. Targeting systems that had been perfectly calibrated for millennia suddenly reported false coordinates. Communication systems that had never experienced interference began scrambling frequencies. Fire control computers developed microsecond delays that threw off weapon trajectories by hundreds of meters. Navigation systems reported positions that were subtly wrong. The effects were subtle at first, just minor glitches that the Velcor AI systems attempted to correct through standard protocols. But the virus had been designed to resist correction, to hide its presence, to make the Velcor systems fight themselves in an endless loop of problems and attempted fixes. The more the AI tried to compensate, the worse the problems became. Elena Vasquez watched from the Resolute as the Velcor ships in Earth orbit began drifting out of formation, their station-keeping thrusters firing erratically, their communication channels filled with confused chatter as captains tried to understand what was happening to their vessels. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for, the window of opportunity when the Velcor were blind and confused. Marcus gave the attack order to all surviving human forces. It was time to hit back with everything they had. The Resolute, Ghost, and Shadow activated their quantum drives and appeared at key locations around the Velcor fleet. But they weren't alone. From hiding spots throughout the solar system, human ships emerged. Some were military vessels that had survived the initial attack by playing dead. Others were converted civilian ships, mining vessels and cargo haulers armed with whatever weapons could be mounted. Even some damaged ships that had been written off as destroyed suddenly powered up, their crews having made desperate repairs in secret. The attack was coordinated chaos. Human ships appeared from impossible angles, fired everything they had, and either vanished via quantum drive or fled at maximum acceleration. The Velcor tried to respond, but their compromised systems made effective return fire nearly impossible. Missiles that should have tracked human ships instead flew off into empty space. Energy weapons that should have been lethal missed by margins that made the difference between life and death. Captain Robert Chen led the Defiance in a direct assault on a Velcor battleship that had been positioned to bombard Earth cities if humanity showed resistance. His ship was smaller and less powerful, but with the enemy's targeting systems corrupted, he could close to point-blank range. The Defiance's railguns hammered the battleship's hull at distances where missing was impossible. The Velcor vessel tried to rotate to bring weapons to bear, but its maneuvering thrusters fired inconsistently, turning what should have been a smooth rotation into a tumbling spin. Across the solar system, the scene repeated itself. Velcor ships that had seemed invincible now found themselves vulnerable, their technological superiority negated by the virus eating away at their systems. Human forces that had been hiding in fear now struck with vengeance, each ship fighting not just for survival but for revenge. The message as the battle raged. Marcus Webb broadcast a message to the Galactic Council on all frequencies. His face appeared on every screen, every display, every communication system the aliens possessed. He spoke in clear, simple English, knowing the Velcor translation systems would convert his words. Humanity had a message for the Galactic Council and for all the species that had submitted to their rule. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not be conquered. The Velcor had made the fatal mistake of believing that a species' technological level determined their worth, their intelligence, their right to exist. They had attacked humanity expecting quick submission, thinking that superior weapons guaranteed victory. The message as the battle raged. Marcus Webb broadcast a message to the Galactic Council on all frequencies. His face appeared on every screen, every display, every communication system the aliens possessed. He spoke in clear, simple English, knowing the Velcor translation systems would convert his words. Humanity had a message for the Galactic Council and for all the species that had submitted to their rule. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not be conquered. The Velcor had made the fatal mistake of believing that a species' technological level determined their worth, their intelligence, their right to exist. They had attacked humanity expecting quick submission, thinking that superior weapons guaranteed victory. But the Velcor had forgotten something important. They had forgotten that warfare wasn't just about technology. It was about will, creativity, and the willingness to do whatever necessary to survive. The Velcor had spent 8,000 years crushing species before they could become threats. In doing so, they had eliminated all internal conflict, all competition, all the forces that drove innovation and adaptation. They had become stagnant, their tactics unchanged for millennia because they had never needed to change. Humanity was different. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, developing new strategies, new weapons, new ways to overcome superior force. Every human conflict had taught lessons that were passed down and refined. Humanity understood guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, psychological operations. They understood that you didn't beat a superior enemy by fighting them fairly. You beat them by fighting smarter, by finding their weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. Marcus delivered his ultimatum. The Velcor would withdraw from the solar system immediately. They would leave humanity alone and never return. In exchange, humanity would allow them to leave peacefully. If the Velcor refused, if they tried to continue their occupation, humanity would take this war to council space. They would hunt Velcor ships across the galaxy. They would use their quantum drives to strike targets the Velcor thought were safe. They would introduce chaos into an empire that had known only order for thousands of years. And most importantly, Marcus revealed the virus. He explained in detail how it worked, how it had spread through the Velcor network, how deeply it had infiltrated their systems. He told them that every ship, every station, every facility that used networked AI was potentially compromised. The Velcor could try to purge the virus, but doing so would require shutting down and rebuilding their entire technological infrastructure from scratch, a process that would take years and leave them vulnerable during the reconstruction. The choice was theirs. Leave humanity alone and maintain their empire, or continue this war and watch their civilization collapse into chaos. The retreat executor Thrain listened to the humans' message from his damaged command center aboard the Eternal Ascendant. Around him, his officers struggled to maintain control over systems that no longer responded properly. The battleship that had taken decades to build, that represented the pinnacle of Velcor engineering, was now barely functional thanks to a virus created by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Thrain felt something he had not experienced in his long life. Genuine fear. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. The Velcor had encountered hundreds of species in their expansion across the galaxy. All of them had followed predictable patterns. All of them had submitted when shown the futility of resistance. But these humans were different. They didn't accept defeat. They adapted. They innovated. They found ways to fight that the Velcor had never anticipated. The human commander's threat to take the war to Council space was not empty bravado. With their quantum displacement technology, humans could strike anywhere without warning. Velcor worlds that had known peace for millennia would suddenly face attacks from an enemy that could appear and vanish at will. The panic alone would destabilize the Empire, and if the virus continued spreading through Council networks, the entire technological foundation of Velcor civilization could collapse. Thrain made his decision. He had spent his career studying warfare and strategy. He knew when a battle was lost. The Velcor had superior numbers and technology, but they had underestimated their enemy's will and creativity. Continuing this fight would cost more than it would gain. Pride was not worth the destruction of everything the Council had built. He opened a channel to Marcus Webb, his golden eyes meeting the human commander's gaze across the distance. Thrain spoke with the dignity of a leader accepting defeat, acknowledging that the Velcor had misjudged humanity. The Council would withdraw from the solar system. They would leave Earth alone. But Thrain also issued a warning. Humanity should not mistake this retreat for weakness. If humans ventured beyond their system and proved to be the aggressive threat the Council feared, there would be consequences. For now, Earth had earned the right to exist on its own terms. Within 48 hours, the Velcor fleet departed Earth orbit. Their damaged ships limped toward jump points heading back to Council space. They left behind debris, ruins, and 4 million dead, but they also left behind a humanity that had been tested and had refused to break. Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the last Velcor ship vanish into faster-than-light travel. Around her, the crew erupted in cheers, celebrating a victory that no one had thought possible. But Elena didn't cheer. She looked at Earth below, still dark in places where power had not been restored, and thought about the cost of survival. On Earth, Sarah Chen emerged from her underground laboratory for the first time in weeks, blinking in the sunlight. She had created a weapon that had defeated a galactic empire, but she had also opened a door that could never be closed. Now the galaxy knew that humanity existed, that humans were dangerous, that Earth would fight rather than submit. Other species would hear this story. Some would respect humanity's strength. Others would see them as a threat that needed to be eliminated before they grew stronger. Marcus Webb stood in his command center, reading reports of casualties and damage. 6 million dead in total when including those who had died in the aftermath of the attack. Entire cities without power or infrastructure. Years of rebuilding ahead, but Earth had survived. Humanity had proven that they belonged among the stars, that they would not be conquered or controlled. The war with the Velcor Council had ended, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. Humanity had been tested and had passed, but now they existed in a galaxy that knew Earth was inhabited by a species that would fight to the death rather than surrender. Some species would seek alliance with this fierce new power. Others would seek to destroy humanity before they could grow stronger. Marcus began planning for the future, for the day when humans would venture beyond their solar system as equals rather than supplicants. Earth had been provoked, and the galaxy had witnessed the retaliation. Now humanity would have to live with the consequences of their victory, ready to defend their freedom against any threat that came from the stars. The age of human isolation had ended. The age of humanity as a galactic power had begun, and the universe would never be the same.